Welcome back to the OK Not OK podcast. I am the SportsZu, and today is part 2 of our two-part series on the top 10 PLEs, in which there were gimmick matches named after them. So today we will do the last 3 in our counting up on the list. So last week we did numbers 1 through 7, so let's just do a quick recap. Number 1 was the Royal Rumble, then followed by the Money in the Bank ladder match. Then we switched from the ladder to the cell at number 3, and at number 4 we similarly were at the Elimination Chamber. Then at number 5 we switched back to ladders with TLC. At number 6, we went to the King and Queen of the Ring tournament. And finally, at number 7, it was Extreme Rules. So let's get right to it. At number 8, we have Survivor Series coming up next Saturday. So that was really the main purpose for the entire list. We wanted to talk about Survivor Series. So at number 8 is our traditional Survivor Series elimination tag match. So Survivor Series is one of the original big 4 WWE pay-per-views, and it actually started all the way back in November of 1987. So with Saturday's upcoming event, that will be 38 straight years of Survivor Series matches. But as you know, Survivor Series has recently changed from the traditional format to War Games, so we're breaking those into 2 separate entries. So up first at number 8 are the traditional Survivor Series matches, so let's talk about those. So what is a traditional Survivor Series match? Well, it is a tag team match with a certain number of competitors. Most often it is either 4-on-4 or 5-on-5, but unlike a regular tag match with just one fall, these are elimination tag matches, so the teams are dwindled down until there can be just one sole survivor winning a match, or it could be all the way to with a clean sweep, 5-0 victory per se. So nonetheless, we've seen a lot of matches go down to the wire with one competitor winning, and we've seen a few the other way with it being that nice, easy, clean sweep. As we said, the very first Survivor Series was all the way back in 1987, and at that event, there were 4 Survivor Series elimination matches. 3 of them were 5-on-5 elimination matches, and one of them was a 10-on-10 tag elimination, in which if either member of a tag team was eliminated, then both members of that tag team were eliminated. And in that very first Survivor Series elimination tag match, we had the Macho Man, Randy Savage, Jake the Snake Roberts, and Ricky Steamboat defeating the Honky Tonk Man when those 3 dominated him so badly that he decided just to give up as he ran out of the ring and was counted out to lose the match. But of course, nothing in particular was on the line, so he was just smart enough to get out of there. And in the main event, it was another 5-on-5 elimination match with Andre the Giant defeating Bam Bam Bigelow. Now throughout the years, there were different numbers of elimination matches that took place at the different Survivor Series events, topping out with 6 Survivor Series elimination matches in 1990. That feels like that event would have gone on forever, needing all of those eliminations, but for some reason in 1998 and 2002, there were no traditional Survivor Series elimination matches. Very disappointing for those 2 years. But all in all, from 1987 through 2021, we had a total of 89 Survivor Series elimination matches, with 77 being with men's teams and the other 12 being women's teams. And surprisingly enough, 4-on-4 tag matches slightly outnumbered 5-on-5 matches, with 40 4-on-4 matches and 38 5-on-5 matches. Now, all of you may be most familiar with those 5-on-5 matches, but they did not really become the norm until 2005, when most matches were actually 4-on-4. But the very last 4-on-4 matches, there was one of them in 2006 for the men, and then one of them for the women in 2014. But speaking of the women, their matches did not become annual events until 2016, when WWE reached this newest brand split era. And then every year from 2016 through 2021, there was at least one men's Survivor Series elimination match and one women's Survivor Series elimination match. And then even in 2019, there was one 5-on-5-on-5 elimination match for both the men and the women because NXT was included in that event. But just like many other things, the pandemic ruined that one too, so NXT has not been involved since that one-time event. And finally, with all of that out of the way, why are traditional Survivor Series matches so low on this list considering that they were such a tradition for so many years? Well, the biggest problem of anything is that there are simply no stakes involved for almost all of these matches. It's really just nothing but bragging rights that are on the line. And that really takes away a lot of things, as in the other 7 types of matches ahead of them, we didn't always have stakes, but most of the time we did, with either the title on the line, or a Money in the Bank briefcase on the line, or a crown on the line, or the main event of WrestleMania on the line. But in most situations, there was just nothing on the line. However, there is one humongous caveat here, as theoretically the most important match in the entire history of the WWE was a Survivor Series elimination match when in 2001 the entire control of the WWE was at stake in a winner-take-all match when it was Team WWF against Team Alliance for the right to control everything. The loser was simply done after this. And as you might guess, Team WWF won this one when The Rock was the sole survivor when he defeated Stone Cold Steve Austin with a little bit of help from Kurt Angle, who was on Team Alliance and proved to be the mole when he came back out after being eliminated and hit Stone Cold with the WWF title belt. And then the Great One finished it off with a rock bottom, and so Vince McMahon was victorious over his own 2 kids who were the leaders of the Alliance. Of course, there were other matches with some things on the line, such as people would be fired if they lost, or they would lose their spot as the GM if they lost, or if they won, they might get control of a show for a certain amount of time. But in the end, those were all mostly nothing burgers. So at the end of the day, this was really just WWE's all-star game of sorts. Just throw in a bunch of stars and see what shakes out of it. I guess if you put it into that context, Survivor Series is mostly just for fun, and considering that it's always pretty much on Thanksgiving weekend, it's really just time to relax and, have some fun with wrestling. So when you put it into that context, well, I guess it's not so bad, but that still just puts it below everything else. But when you look more deeply at it, there's a lot more that's wrong with this. So the biggest thing that I hated were the quick eliminations that happen in several different respects. Now, first and foremost, there would be these one-punch eliminations. Just right off the bell, you would see maybe the Big Show come out with a knockout punch on Mark Henry, and that would be elimination in 2 seconds. And that was really just kind of a bummer. On top of that, you might see a signature move defeat an opponent, where on any other night of the year, they would not win a match with that particular move. But at Survivor Series, that would be good enough and people would be eliminated, even though most of the time their competitors were mostly standing on the outside for most of the match, so you wouldn't think they really would be tired enough to lose by a mere signature move instead of a finishing move, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then of course, the worst thing of all are the no-help eliminations. So these were tag team matches, so as you know, in a standard tag team match, you get your partner all the time breaking up pin attempts for your benefit so that you don't lose a match after a certain move. But in these 4-on-4 or 5-on-5 matches, for some reason your teammates forget the basic rules of tag team matches and just watch you get pinned in the middle of the ring instead of doing what any other normal tag team partner would do, would be to run right in there and knock off the opponent. Those are just so frustrating. That just happened over and over in all of these elimination matches. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, of course, there is one big thing that is very enjoyable with these matches, and that is seeing the classic big comebacks. Now, my personal favorite was in 2014 with Dolph Ziggler taking down the Authority by beating Kane, Seth Rollins, and Triple H back-to-back with a little help from the WWE debut of Sting, which cost the Authority, well, their authority. So that was really enjoyable to see Stephanie McMahon crying at the end of the night. But, you know, Dolph was amazing, and certainly he got a humongous push to the WWE Championship. Oh, yeah, that didn't happen either, which kind of ruined things in the future, but at least it made for a great moment at Survivor Series. So with that said, we're planning the traditional Survivor Series match at number 8. And with that, let's go to number 9, which you would probably guess is Survivor Series War Games matches. So we've only had a few of those in WWE, but the origin goes all the way back to 1987, when it was developed by the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, for, at the time, still Jim Crockett Productions. That eventually would turn into WCW, and then eventually the WWE would get the rights to War Games, but it would take all the way until 2017 when the WWE would actually use the War Games match, when it had started all the way back at the Great American Bash Tour on Independence Day, July 4th of 1987 in Atlanta, Georgia. But speaking of that first NXT match, it was the Undisputed Era that defeated both the Authors of Pain and Sanity in that very first match. But of course, War Games did not move to the main roster until Survivor Series War Games in 2022, when we had the OG Bloodline with Solo Sikoa defeating the Brawling Brutes, Drew McIntyre and Kevin Owens for the men, and then the super team of Becky Lynch, Bianca Belair, Alexa Bliss, come on back Alexa, anytime now, come on back, Asuka, and, well, Michin, then just known as Mia Yim, but they defeated the OG Damage Control team, plus Rhea Ripley and Nikki Cross. But we have to talk about the rules of this match because they are the craziest in all of professional wrestling, because you don't have just one ring, you have two rings put together against each other and then a steel cage surrounding both rings. Then on top of it, the original concept of this match was to have no pinfall victory. So you had to win by submission or surrender or just knocking someone out so that they could not respond. But nowadays, yeah, the pin has come back, so you can win by either pin or submission. Now in these matches, there are usually between 3 and 5 members on a team, and it starts with a one-on-one bout for the first 5 minutes. And the other participants in this match are locked in shark cages up at the top of the ramp, and every 3 minutes, one person is released from the cage to join the match. And due to that rule, there is an advantage for one team who gets their person to come out first in the alternating back and forth of the releases from the cage every time. And if it's a 5-on-5 match, they have the advantage on 4 separate occasions for 3-minute intervals. So 12 total minutes of advantage, which you would think would be a significant advantage. But in somewhat the craziest idea of them all, this match does not actually start until every single participant is inside the steel cage. So there is a bell that rings at the beginning of this contest when it's just one-on-one, but that bell is actually only to signify the 2 competitors to start fighting, and it starts that initial 5-minute clock. And then from there, fortunately, the WWE added a countdown clock on the screen last year, so we now see when the next person enters the cage, then a new 3-minute countdown begins once they are inside the cage. And that continues until every single member is inside the cage, and then the match actually starts, and then we get just one pinfall to end the match. And with all of that out of the way, why is this match at number 9 on the top 10 list? Well, in addition to everything we said about the traditional Survivor Series elimination match, the same thing applies here. There are typically no stakes whatsoever, and it's just for bragging rights, because let's think about this. We have the OG Bloodline taking on the new Bloodline next Saturday. If the OG Bloodline wins, what happens? Does Roman Reigns automatically get a shot to become the tribal chief again? No, he does not. But if he did, what if Jimmy Uso got the last pin? Or what if Jey Uso got the pin? Could they challenge Solo Sikoa for that Ulafala instead? Nope, that's just not part of this gig at all. But if the new Bloodline wins, does that mean Solo Sikoa gets to be undisputed tribal chief for all of the rest of eternity? Well, nope, that's not the case either, unfortunately, because surely Roman Reigns will go right back to demanding another match to become the tribal chief yet again. So unfortunately, absolutely nothing will change about the dynamics of the Bloodline after the match, and of course the same thing goes for the women's match when it's just a mismatch of 5 different people on a team from both brands, with one team having 3 members of Raw and 2 members of SmackDown, and the other team having the opposite. So on top of that, we had to explain the rules for a really long time there, because they are the dumbest rules in all of sports and sports entertainment. Because let's just break this down one thing at a time. So to start the match, it's 5 minutes of one-on-one, then we have a new competitor entering every 3 minutes after that. So even if it takes 0 seconds to get from that shark cage into the ring to start that 3-minute clock, that is 29 minutes. 29 minutes before the match actually starts. Okay, so let's do some math here. So far we've had 4 War Games matches on the main roster. 3 of those 4 were 5-on-5. So we're just going to ignore last year's 4-on-4 women's match for the purpose of making the math a little bit easier. But in the 3 5-on-5 matches, they've taken 39 minutes and 40 seconds, 38 minutes and 30 seconds, and then last year's men's match very fast at 34 minutes and 50 seconds. So if you round that up to the nearest minute, that is an average of 38 minutes per match. And if you remember, I just said it takes 29 minutes to even get to the match officially starting. So that means there are just 9 minutes worth of actual match to get to a finish. So in percentage terms, that is just 24% of the actual competition is the match itself. To flip that around, that is 76% of the fighting has no bearing on the conclusion. It is 76% of the fighting is before we get to a match. Wow, 76% before we even get to a match. Oh man. That can't be good. There's nothing good about that. There's nothing like that in all of sports. But hey, this is the SportsZu, so like we do at the SportsZu, let's try to compare this to other sports out there. Okay, so let's start with, say, table tennis. So if you ever played a little ping pong in your day, maybe to start the game or start the match, you would hit the ball over a couple times. Our general rule was 3 times the ball had to go over the net before you played the first official point, and whoever won that first point then officially got to start the game with the very first serve. So the whole point of that first point was to get the serve first. So that in a game to 21 where it could go over because you have to win by 2, that very one little point was just a minuscule amount of time in that entire match. And I'm sure there are other light games that are similar to table tennis where you just play the 1 point to determine who gets to have that initial advantage to serve first. But yeah, that's not a very big deal at the end of the day. Then another one I thought of was the original XFL. If you can remember that, they didn't want to have a coin toss to start the game. So what they did instead was put the ball at the 50-yard line, and then one player from each team would stand 10 yards away, and when the ref blew the whistle, The two players would run at the ball and dive on it, and whoever gained control of the ball, that would be the same as winning the coin toss, so they could choose to kick or defer, and then they would also get the ball in overtime if the game were to go to overtime. So admittedly, that was a full contact coin flip. So I guess that's a little bit like War Games, because obviously you're fighting in the middle of the rings at War Games for that whole entire time, but that wasn't even a real football play here. But you know what? Who started the original XFL? I guess that's why we got full contact for a coin flip, because Vince McMahon would know about War Games at that time, so it was kind of his idea to have full contact. Anyways, in a much less contact version of that, dodgeball, kind of the same. You blow the whistle and then everyone runs to the middle to grab the balls to try to get the balls first to knock out their opponents. But yeah, not quite the same as that XFL rule. And lastly, the other thing I could think of that's somewhat similar, in auto racing, you have the pace cars. So everyone just kind of gets going and up to speed behind the pace cars, but no one can pass during that time. And then after a crash, you do get the yellow flags coming out, so then you can have laps run under caution. They count, but you can't pass anyone. But you know, it's also not really the same at all either. But it is a little bit of time where it's different, where you don't really get the winner, and there's not really the full competition going on. But I don't know. It's really a stretch there, folks. It's really a stretch. So there is just nothing like War Games in any other sport. So it's just kind of out there in left field, and we don't really like it. All right, so let's move on. The competition has started, but we'll say the match hasn't started. So let's talk about those advantages a little bit. So like we said, you theoretically have an advantage by having a power play, like in hockey of sorts, with having an extra person inside the ring, inside the rings. That's really hard. They have to keep saying that. But inside the rings, where you should be able to take out your opponent very easily. But at the end of the day, those advantages always seem to mean nothing. So once we get all 5 members of each team in there, do you ever know a Survivor Series War Games match that doesn't have a moment where you have everybody on one team standing on one side, everybody on the other team standing on the other side, and they all are just kind of standing there okay and looking at each other before they start fighting again? So at that point, the advantage was really for nothing, because everything's just kind of all square again at that moment. It just kind of ruins everything. So yeah, sure, one team might be a little bit more beaten up at that moment, but at the same time, the other team has been in the ring a lot less, so they are more fresh, that they haven't had to expend as much energy. I don't know, it's just all a wash. It's very convoluted. So at the end of the day, with all of that, the advantage really means nothing. And lastly, we also want to say that this match is just one fall, which is no fun at all. This is Survivor Series. You want to have survivors. If you just have one single fall out of 10 people being inside of a ring, that's not really that interesting. The whole point of Survivor Series is to knock people off one by one and try to be that sole survivor. But in War Games, it's just ending like any other match, a pin or a submission in the middle of the ring. So it just kind of ruins the specialness of it. Instead, we just get a supersized 2-ring event with a steel cage around it. I don't like it. That's why it's at number 9. And we just hope they go back to traditional Survivor Series matches. This just doesn't do it, folks. Do it, you know, at any other time. Put it on Monday Night Raw. I don't know. But as Survivor Series, we want those elimination matches. It's really a good tradition that did not need to go away. And lastly, there was indeed one WWE pay-per-view that was called Fatal 4-Way in June of 2010. There were 3 championship matches that were Fatal 4-Ways, and Sheamus retained in the main event in that one. But we see Fatal 4-Ways all the time, and admittedly, they're usually pretty good matches. You get some good times with people matching up against each other, a lot of one-on-one time in the middle of the ring, and of course, they're no DQ matches, so you can have a lot of craziness going on inside and outside the ring, so those are good matches. I'm not saying anything against that, but the problem is they're just too common. So that was a one-time event. Fatal 4-Way, we like you as a match, but as being your own standalone pay-per-view or PLE, you just are nothing special. So yeah, one and done for that one. So you are at number 10. So there you have it. This has been part 2 of our 2-part series of the top 10 gimmick matches with PLEs named after them, with Survivor Series way down at the bottom. But if you have not had enough Survivor Series talk, go right on over here to check out the docs to Survivor Series videos from this week. I'm the SportsZu, and this has been the OK Not OK podcast.